Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche of the LaRouche Organization. Tonight, September 30th, we're going to be discussing with you a combat manual of a certain type, a ideational combat manual, just been released by the LaRouche Organization, and it is called the Coming U.S. Economic Miracle on the New Silk Road. Now, the reason it would be appropriate to talk about it as an ideational combat manual is because the combination of challenges and crises that people have been confronted by often result in wild fragmentation in discussion about what should be done about what appear often to be a myriad of problems. And really, there's an essential singular conception that has to precede all of that. And what that is what is the nature and function of mankind? And how can you have, as an individual, a conception of how to advance or develop the human race as a whole when you're one person from one culture with one relatively short lifespan? You know, how do you do that? How do you reconcile the apparent paradox of being one limited person with the notion of moving humanity as a whole in some fashion that is not linear or causal in the normal sense? Because obviously that's not possible. The very limits of human life itself mean that the idea of immortality or making an immortal contribution for humanity as a whole has to rely on the concept that the individual's relationship to humanity has some efficient, knowable, discernible, intelligible, and communicable form. The process may not be all those things, but the form in which the process takes place has to be. And it's important to kind of discuss this every once in a while. I mean, a lot of people look at this as a religious conception. People who are not religious, of course, often run into a problem because it appears they call it often spiritual as opposed to religious. But it's got to be manifest, and it's got to be something that can be made very concrete. Now, if you look at what is apparently confronting the transatlantic world, it appears that nothing that is suggested and no institution appears to be capable of even adequately addressing one portion of the problem, let alone the problem as a whole. But at the same time, in other areas of the world, such as China, there is no palpable progress being made in a certain direction. And what's interesting, one of the things that we try to do in the pamphlet, and you're going to hear all about it, is to allow the United States population and also people with whom we're collaborating in our international organization to get above the failures and the kind of systemic failure, almost hereditary failure, that you seem to be getting from every government, whether it's Germany or the United States, Great Britain, or France. There may be individuals who are not tragic in that way, but generally speaking, nobody's proud of their government. Nobody's saying that this is clearly a path forward for the future that we can be proud of and we're a part of. And given that there seems, at least in an approximation, to be a kind of existential threat, or potentially existential threat to the entire human race, not merely in the form of the coronavirus pandemic, but in the form of the responses and failed responses to that challenge, this is a good time to take this question up and have it discussed in some concrete terms, namely those of physical economy, and also in terms of what people might call the political organizing process that is necessary to allowing this new conception of mankind, or let's say a renewed conception of mankind, to be made available to everybody, to people who are homeless, to people who are at Harvard who need it as much as people who are homeless, to farmers, to persons returning from Afghanistan, to people who were, born after 9/11, to people who are 80 years old. Everybody needs a renewed and renewed recommitment to this higher idea. And so what we're going to do is to try to give you an idea of what our pamphlet, The Coming U.S. Economic Miracle on the New Silk Road, is dedicated to doing, why we wrote it, how we wrote it, and what we'd like you to do with it. So we're going to start off with one of the co-authors of the report. That's Chris Sayre, and he'll be followed by Jason Ross. So, Chris?
Yep. So I wanted to, this pamphlet, if you read it, actually sit down in a relaxed way and read it from the beginning to the end. It's actually thoroughly composed, and certain ideas occur again and again over time. You'll pick up on these ideas, and they're explored from different angles. The first section, which I think is very important for Americans on the question of history, because most people watch a video on YouTube and think they know something about American history. It's just not true. You've got to read, you've got to study what the founding fathers did. You have to recognize that there was a huge brawl between founding fathers, and this pamphlet gets into that. And you have to look at what the issues are. What are the fundamental issues in terms of that fight between, on the one side, the nationalists, Washington, Hamilton, and others who were in that line throughout, versus those who advocated from the inception of the United States, unfortunately, advocated a tragic policy that sowed the seeds for the Civil War and potentially for the destruction of the country right from the very beginning. So I think this pamphlet, if you read it, if you read the history section, you will get a sense of that and get a sense of what the issue is in terms of what our nation was founded to be, what we were founded to oppose in terms of the British Empire system. And I wanted to just read to you this beautiful quote from January 20th, 1961. This is the inaugural address of John F. Kennedy. And, think about if anybody spoke these words, they would be absolutely beautiful and stunning. But the fact that it's a president of the United States that speaks these words almost brings you to tears, because you don't hear presidents in the recent period speaking like this. It almost brings you to tears. Now, we've had people who have tried to be presidents. We've had Ronald Reagan. We've had President Trump. We've had people who tried to be presidents. But listen to what John F. Kennedy says. And as I say in this, remember, this is at the height of the Cold War. This is 2 years before the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2.5 years, where we almost went to nuclear war with Russia. So he says, let both sides, the United States and the Soviet Union, seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join in that historic effort? And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. So this is not only beautiful, but one thing that strikes you immediately is that everybody knows that one quote, right? Ask not what your country can do for you, etc. How many people have heard this entire speech and thought about it? It's absurd to take that one section out of it without the entirety of the speech. What is he talking about? You know, you have to hear this whole speech. So I think this is critical for us to think about right now in terms of the insane Cold War mindset that has taken over again in the United States, in terms of the new enemies, right? We're given new enemies. China, the new enemy. Russia, the new enemy. Right at the point where the Cold War is over, we're told no. You know, we have new reason to have enemies again. It's insane. It's insane, and it's done by the British. And what this pamphlet shows is how the British have again and again and again sought to destroy the potential of the American system of economics, which is discussed in here, elaborated in here. You have to, read it, study it, read the primary sources, the papers by Hamilton that are cited in here. Read those primary sources. I want to say that Anton Chaikin and the book that he just wrote, Who We Are, has added greatly to this history section, to this introduction. I cite a lot of sections of his book in this introduction, in this history section, and his book, which is only the first volume, the second volume is going to be out soon, I hope. As I say in a footnote in here, you don't know who you are if you haven't read Who We Are, and I absolutely mean that. It is critical reading. But the sections from Hamilton, the question again and again that comes throughout history of a sovereign currency, of a national currency which is deployed to develop the physical economy of the nation. That this idiocy of Bitcoin, for example, which people fall into. Well, I don't know what people think. It's new, it's exciting, it's outside of the dollar system, whatever. It's insane. It's not a national currency. You don't have any control over its value. You don't have any control over how it gets invested. You have no control over it. Nations have no control over it. When you read this this pamphlet, you'll get a sense of what a currency is, what a national currency is. It is a sovereign thing. It is only a sovereign thing that is created by governments for investment in nations and to develop the general welfare of the population. And that is embedded in our Constitution. And it has been under attack from day one by the Confederate faction, the states' rights faction. And it's not that states don't have certain rights, but the idea of making that your mission to defend states' rights. When you look at, you have to justify that in the eyes of George Washington. You have to look into George Washington's eyes and explain to him why you're arguing for states' rights, because he did not agree with you. And you say you love George Washington, he's the founder of the nation, you look up to George Washington, and yet you disagree with George Washington if you are pushing for this states' rights outlook, because he didn't believe in that. He sided with Hamilton on the question of a national bank. He sided he was on the side of the general welfare clause of the Constitution. And that's an important thing. Thomas Jefferson was not. And I know Jefferson is a hero to many, but he was not. And I will tell you from day one, and the quotes are in this pamphlet, from day one, the argument against internal improvements, the argument against a national bank, whether it was Patrick Henry, whether it was, the Confederate supporters, they said, if the government has the right to build roads and canals and railroads, then they have the right to take your slaves away. So we can't let that happen. And so the irony was the South was completely undeveloped. White people were very, very poor in the South, unless you were a massive plantation owner, and you probably still, how rich could you be? Because your entire society was backward. Your entire society lacked infrastructure and the conditions of life that the North had, because the North had industry, because the North had free laborers and investment in infrastructure and canals and railroads and all kinds of development. So the general population lived a higher standard of living. So these are the things that you have to actually look at and confront, because there's a lot of things that people believe, they say they believe, because they think it fits into their ideology. And it's wrong. And if you read this pamphlet, you're going to find out that it's wrong. And you're going to have to confront the fact that people that you say are your heroes, like George Washington, disagree with you. So it's fascinating to look at. And, there's one of the points that is made in this history section is that this American system concept of investment in internal improvements, investment in scientific progress, as John Quincy Adams really, really pushed for. But the Army Corps of Engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers played an incredible role in the development of the United States. Their mission was not to go around the world and go to war and destroy other nations. The Army Corps of Engineers' mission was to develop the United States, and they did it. Engineers that came out of West Point were involved in every step of building the canals, the national roads, the railroads. They were involved in every step of it. They were involved in every step of mapping the United States, of building harbors, ports, building dams, building the nation. And at this point, where you look at what the United States has been involved in these insane wars around the world, and how our military has been completely abused and misused, seeking monsters to destroy abroad. This is the complete empire policy that has taken over the United States. If we return to the actual American mission, our military will be focused on building the infrastructure of the United States. We're going to train a whole generation. And we can get into this, I think, in depth, because you have a population. You have a population now which is depraved. You have a young population which wouldn't know what a productive job was, if they saw it right in front of them. They wouldn't understand it. The idea of productivity, the idea of a productive economy, which this pamphlet really goes through. What is a productive job? What does that mean? This is addressed in here in a scientific, rigorous way. So I think, the critical thing is looking at the history of the United States, looking at these periods under Monroe and John Quincy Adams, under Washington, under Hamilton, under Monroe and John Quincy Adams, Nicholas Biddle, the Second National Bank, and then looking at the battle of what took that down, the destruction of the Second National Bank, the destruction of the General Survey Act, which allowed the Army Corps to make a general survey of the nation to look at what infrastructure we needed to build the nation and pull it together, the entire nation, not a singular state, but the entire nation functioning as a whole. What Lincoln did with the Transcontinental Railroad in the middle of the Civil War. In the middle of the Civil War, he was sending generals like Dodge out to the West to develop a railroad across the country because he understood it was that important, that you couldn't just defeat the Confederacy, but you had to develop the infrastructure of the nation as a whole, or it would fall apart. That's what Lincoln did. He was shot and murdered by the British Empire before he ever got to see that railroad completed, but he set it into motion in the middle of the war. And then the Centennial Exposition is discussed in here, which is really critical because this is the spreading of the American system to the entire world, to Russia, to China under Sun Yat-sen, to Japan, to the entire world. And what did the British do? They were terrified of this, and they set off World War I. And they told us our enemies were Germany, our enemies were, they created our enemies. And Woodrow Wilson fell right into it. So we've had treasonous presidents who have fallen for British Empire policies, and we've had great American presidents who have fought for not only the development of our nation, but critically the mission of developing the world and freeing it from the empire system. You see that with FDR as well. You see it with John F. Kennedy, who unfortunately, as many great presidents, did not live long enough to complete the mission and the work that he had, which he laid out in that inaugural address. Think of that. Had he lived past 1963, that idea that he had in that inaugural address, another 5 years of that, the world would be a different place. So I'll leave it at that and hand it over to Jason. I just wanted to give people a passionate sense of the history, and I think the rest of the pamphlet, which Jason oversaw and wrote a lot of, is where we're going to go from here. What are the great projects we can launch in that tradition of what we've done in the past.
And I think that not only is this a great program for where the U.S. and the world can go, but I think one of the things that's really notable and powerful about this is how farsighted LaRouche was, both in laying out the issues that face us today and in setting in motion the solutions that exist for us today, or the potentials for moving forward, like what China has done through its Belt and Road Initiative, which is a project it has embarked on thanks to, in part, the efforts of Lyndon LaRouche, Helga Sepp LaRouche, over decades, organizing internationally for a new approach to economics. We've got a whole section about the life of Lyndon LaRouche with a link to learn more about his proposals in the 70s for an international development bank to totally transform the international financial system. The work that he did over decades, laying out through his economic studies and his organizing, his repeated runs for presidency, the devotion that he had to leading the country and the world, setting us with a stage where we can rely on that commitment and that courage that he showed, and the ideas that he put forward. Take, for example, the green outlook. LaRouche was attacking this trend towards the green ideology, half a century ago when it was getting going, as the insane opposition to nuclear power was being created, as a cult-like belief in nature as a sort of god was being instilled in people. Today, if you think about what's happening today, look at how the discussion about climate is just seeping in everywhere. It's not going to go away on its own. If you think, there's no straws anymore, okay, I can live with that. It's not going to stop with any of these things. The Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, like the think tank of the British establishment, the British monarchy, just put out a report about why all of security concerns around the world have to be rethought in terms of climate change, including how the responsibility to protect, the British idea that Tony Blair put forward here in Chicago in 1999, the idea that sovereignty is over, the Westphalian order is over, the countries don't have self-determination, but instead supranational institutions, the Brits, have a responsibility to just go into countries to protect the people. We saw this with the disaster of Syria, of Libya. What will it mean when the responsibility to protect extends not only to human beings, but to nature? The British are saying the military will be called in if Brazil is developing the Amazon in a way that we don't like. Ecocide is a crime. It should be tried at the International Criminal Court. This is not coming from a concern for nature. It's definitely not coming from a concern for human beings who take a back seat to whales and salamanders. This is evil today. People think, you can't compare things to Hitler. The green policy is way worse than Hitler. You don't need a strange mustache and a grating voice to be an evil person. And people don't want to confront the evil being committed in their name today, including by policies that they personally think that they support. So, the inflation that we're facing today, LaRouche laid out how to address this, how to create a new financial system multiple times in his career. At the 2008 financial crisis, 2007-8, the housing collapse, but it wasn't just the housing collapse. LaRouche was insistent at the time, as he had been, that Glass-Steagall was the way to shut down this, obedience to Wall Street. This is still true today. We go through it in this pamphlet about where the inflation is coming from. Hint, you can't keep printing money without causing inflation. And what to do about it, how to actually create productivity, which all of the trillions of dollars thrown around since COVID have not done. If you want to increase productivity, do it through infrastructure. Do it through a world public health platform. Do it through energy infrastructure, real energy infrastructure, not a windmill, not solar panels, nuclear power. Higher technologies, not lower technologies. Higher technologies that can power a high-speed electrified rail network. Higher technologies that can transform our ability to desalinate ocean water at an agricultural scale. Higher energy technologies that will allow us to power rockets that instead of just firing for a few minutes when you take off, can be turned on the whole way and get you to Mars in a few weeks. Or if not to get you to Mars, get a nuclear explosive to that comet that's going to hit the Earth in a few weeks. That's the kind of power that we need. So just to wrap up on this, I think, in terms of what it is that really drives the ability to increase productivity, it comes down to science and technology, to discover new physical principles, and space is one of the greatest areas to pull all of that together. Space, nuclear science, they come together in the moon with the enormous potential of the helium-3, that wonderful isotope of helium, that the sun is obligingly depositing in the moon's dust, just waiting for us to come and get it and use it as the ultimate nuclear fusion fuel for powering power plants here, nuclear rockets in space. That's the kind of scale of thinking that we need to leapfrog on a pathway for development. People talk about a poor country leapfrogging, saying, well, we'll skip some of these lower stages of development and move forward. Well, where do we develop? Are we a developed country as opposed to a developing country? I hope we're always a developing country. We should be developing. And these kinds of huge missions are the things that are going to really draw us forward to leapfrog what we can do today. And I think it's very exciting to have this, perspective for the future that at the same time is incredibly polemical about what you think the United States is, what you might think the green ideology really means, and about the true evil that is embedded in this financialization of the economy and how that's connected to geopolitics. So that's let's leave it there.
All right, so we've opened up the Q&A section, and I have a few things that I'd like to ask about while people are getting in there. I think I'd like to have a little bit of discussion about how many of the pamphlets we've got, what we're thinking about in terms of the distribution. This doesn't just have to come from the two of you guys; it can come from other people that call in. But one other specific thing I want to point out about the multi-purpose quality of this pamphlet. The section on American history is our immediate answer to the 1619 Project, among other things. That is to say, rather than divert or be diverted into discussions which are either dead end or are largely noise, what we prefer to do is to offer a solution to the actual problem that people are facing, and then as we do that, sort of backfist the sophistry and silliness that's otherwise out there and plaguing the country. That's just one element. The title of the report, The Coming U.S. Economic Miracle on the New Silk Road, obviously proposes a collaboration with China. And, of course, the major sort of way that things are being couched out there right now, at least in general media, if you were to listen to it, is China is the enemy. Matter of fact, there is a full lineup of NATO, green NATO, against China. And so the strategy we have here is to recall that the ideas that the Chinese have improved upon and have adapted to their own use were the ideas of Abraham Lincoln. As a matter of fact, as they would have said, Sun Yat-sen specifically with his three principles of the people, which refer to government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And Sun Yat-sen, of course, was one of the founders of the of China. So there are many different ways in which to talk about this. One last thing I just want to point out is we actually mean it when we say you got to read it. Now, whether you decide that you're going to read it from cover to cover that way, consecutively, or you decide to read it as a whole, because let's assume that somebody is either intimidated, isn't used to it, doesn't know if they can understand it. Much of the pamphlet is constructed in 1-page and 2-page sections. And the thing that will pay off will be to take any entry point, because there are many of them, there are 14 different sections, to this pamphlet, and work through 1 page or 2 pages. Some sections are longer, the American history section, for example. There's a section also on productivity, which is 4 pages. But it's something that people should think about doing. Because if you do it, you will find that your relationship to almost everything that you're hearing out there in the so-called marketplace of pseudo-ideas will change. Your relationship will change. You'll be able to think again about how to deal with things, like when the vaccine question comes up. Rather than discussing, are you for a vaccine or against a vaccine, one thing you might want to discuss is, are you for the shutting of American hospitals or are you against it? Because right now, friends, hospitals are being shut down all over the United States. as we stand here and we talk about the coronavirus and the great problem, the crisis, we're shutting hospitals everywhere. Is that even known? Well, if people stop talking for a minute about whether or not they're going to take the vaccine and just take a look at the physical conditions of healthcare, then you could actually begin you're discussing something completely different. So one of the elements of what we want to try to encourage in our organizing and getting this pamphlet out is we want to confront what was called by a very bad person the jargon of authenticity. The originator of that phrase is a guy named T.W. Adorno. By the way, he's the originator also of critical theory. For those who have talked about critical race theory, it comes from critical theory. And Adorno talked about, and this is a good way to understand what he really meant, because the jargon of authenticity just means what we used to call in the vernacular bullshit, out of bullshit. You say something that sounds like it means something. Huh? What was once called at one point truthiness, although the term truthiness itself has had several meanings. So I just wanted to point this out. We're going to go to questions and discussion now, but we're doing something way different than we've done in the past. And we're asking for everybody to kind of get involved with us in provoking a process which is going to allow us to recruit, to factionalize, and to orient a lot of people to taking on a lot of things that you basically know were wrong, but you didn't know quite how to deal with them. Okay, so we'll go to our questions and answers now.